My name is Clara Reynolds. For years, I've been the one paying for every single one of my sister's birthday celebrations. I covered everything: the extravagant cakes, the decorations, the bottles of champagne she enjoyed without ever offering a thank you. Every year, I convinced myself it was fine, that maybe the next celebration would be different. This time, I decided to go all out. I reserved an entire restaurant, organized every tiny detail myself, and told myself that perhaps this year she would finally recognize me as part of the family, rather than just the person footing the bill. When I pulled up that evening, the valet stepped forward and took my car keys. The doorman checked the guest list before motioning to someone nearby. Security was called over, and I could immediately tell from the man's uneasy expression that something wasn't right. Then I heard my sister's voice from behind him. It was calm, confident, almost rehearsed. "She's not allowed in." I stopped cold. My sister stood near the entrance, wearing a glittering gold dress that caught the restaurant lights, smiling as though nothing about the situation was cruel or humiliating. My parents stood beside her, quiet and unmoving, like they had rehearsed this moment together. My father let out a small laugh and said casually, "You actually thought you were invited?" My mother's lips curved into a faint smile, her eyes completely empty of sympathy. I waited for someone, anyone, to speak up, to remind them that I had paid for the entire evening, the flowers, the music, the champagne, the room itself, but the silence stretched on. The security guard glanced at me with an apologetic look and quietly told me I needed to step away from the entrance. I didn't argue. I simply turned and walked toward the parking lot. As the doors closed behind me, the sound of laughter and music faded, leaving only the quiet of the night around me. I sat in my car for a moment and pulled out my phone. The glow from the screen lit up the inside of the windshield while I typed out a message. My thumb hovered for a second before pressing send. Then I leaned back and took a slow breath, unsure whether the feeling in my chest was anger, emptiness, or something in between. Half an hour later, something happened that none of them inside that restaurant would ever forget. If you were in my place, locked out of the very party you paid for, what would you do? I'd genuinely like to know. Would you stay silent, swallow the humiliation, and walk away? Or would you do something to make them remember it forever? Share your thoughts. I drove home without music or conversation, just the quiet hum of the road beneath the tires while their laughter replayed in my head. Over and over, I replayed that moment at the entrance, trying to understand why I had still hoped they would treat me like family. By the time I reached my apartment, exhaustion settled over me like a heavy coat. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter and immediately noticed the folder sitting neatly on my desk. Inside were every invoice, receipt, and confirmation email connected to the party I had organized. I sat down and began flipping through the pages slowly. Each document carried a reminder of the effort I had poured into the evening. The flower arrangements ordered weeks ahead of time, the designer cake customized with gold lettering, the rental contract for the restaurant, the decorative centerpieces I had carefully chosen to match the theme. I remembered how proud I had been when everything finally came together perfectly. At the time, I had convinced myself that maybe this celebration would be different. Maybe this time my sister would thank me, and maybe my parents would finally acknowledge the effort I put into holding our family together. Instead, the only image that kept returning to my mind was Maggie's expression as she calmly told the staff I wasn't welcome. That memory burned through me like acid. I closed the folder slowly and stared at it for several seconds. The emotion rising inside me was no longer sadness. It was something sharper: disgust. Not only toward them, but toward myself for allowing the pattern to repeat for so many years. I grabbed the stack of papers and began ripping them apart. The tearing sound was loud and strangely satisfying. The pieces scattered across the table, white fragments piling up like the remains of broken promises. When I finished, I stuffed the scraps into a trash bag and tied it shut, leaving it beside the door. Somehow the bag felt lighter than the burden I had carried for years. Then I opened my laptop. The blue glow from the screen illuminated the dark apartment as I logged into my bank account. Maggie's name appeared again and again across the payment history. Rent transfers, phone bills, credit card payments, tuition deposits, even small monthly amounts I had quietly sent whenever she claimed she had an emergency. I had approved every one of them, automatically, without hesitation. For a long moment, I simply stared at the list, the cursor hovering over the cancel option. Then I clicked it. Each confirmation felt like shutting another door. Rent canceled, credit card canceled, tuition canceled. One by one, the automatic payments disappeared until only my own expenses remained on the screen. Something inside me shifted then. It wasn't rage and it wasn't relief either. It was a strange calm, the kind that arrives after a storm has already exhausted itself. For the first time, I could clearly see how much of my life had revolved around trying to keep them satisfied, paying for temporary peace that never lasted. I picked up my phone again. The conversation with Maggie was still open from earlier that week, filled with short, polite messages that had never meant anything. I typed one simple line: "Handle your own bills from now on." I read it twice before sending it. My hands didn't shake. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. Just a quiet sense of finality that felt almost cleansing. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. The apartment was silent except for the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. It was a sound I had never really noticed before, steady and patient, as though time itself had been waiting for me to reach this moment. I looked around the room. The apartment was small and simple, but it belonged to me. No one else could claim it. Walking over to the window, I caught my reflection in the glass. For a moment, I barely recognized the woman looking back. The version of me who had spent years buying affection had finally disappeared. In her place stood someone tired but steady, someone wounded but no longer willing to beg for acceptance. I thought about all the years I had spent apologizing, explaining, and cleaning up the messes my family left behind just for the chance to feel included. That hope had vanished, and strangely enough, I didn't feel its absence. Quietly, I spoke the words aloud, almost like a promise to myself. I'm done funding my own humiliation. My voice didn't tremble. It sounded firm and certain, the kind of truth that only needs to be said once. Morning sunlight had just begun slipping through the blinds when a knock echoed against the door. At first it was soft, then more persistent. I hesitated before opening it, expecting perhaps a delivery or a neighbor. Instead, Maggie stood there, holding a bouquet of lilies wrapped in pale paper. Her eyes were red as if she had been crying, and her voice wavered when she spoke. "Can I come in?" she asked. Without saying anything, I stepped aside. She walked into the apartment cautiously, as if the floor beneath her might crack. The scent of the flowers spread through the room, sweet and almost overwhelming. Maggie set them gently on the table before turning toward me. "I was wrong," she said quietly. "I shouldn't have said those things yesterday." I didn't respond. She kept talking, her words tumbling out in a mixture of apology and explanation. "You know how Mom is, and Dad, he pushes people. I didn't want to make things worse. I thought you'd understand." As she spoke, I studied her face carefully. There was a familiar rhythm to her speech, the kind that comes from someone practiced at smoothing things over with excuses rather than genuine regret. Her tears appeared quickly, and for a brief moment I wondered whether they were truly meant for me or simply for herself. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Clara, please, I can't manage this without you. Rent is due next week, and my cards are completely maxed out. You've always been the one I could rely on. I'll change, I promise." The word promise struck harder than I expected. I had heard it too many times before. Promises of gratitude, promises of appreciation, promises that things would finally be different. Every one of them had dissolved the moment she got what she wanted. I let her finish speaking, then took a slow breath before answering. "You'll have to stand on your own for once." My voice came out calm, almost gentle, but I saw the flicker in her eyes, hurt disbelief, and something sharper underneath. She stared at me for a few seconds, then scoffed. "So that's it? After everything I've been through?" I didn't respond. She grabbed her purse, her tears vanishing as fast as they had appeared. "You think you're better than me now, don't you?" Her tone cracked. "Fine, don't help me, but don't come crying when you end up alone." She stormed out the door, slamming hard enough to shake the frame. For a long time, I didn't move. The bouquet sat on the table, petals trembling slightly from the draft. I thought about throwing it away, but didn't. Instead, I made coffee and sat by the window. The apartment was quiet again, the kind of quiet I had longed for. I told myself this was peace, not emptiness. That illusion lasted until later that afternoon. My phone buzzed nonstop with notifications. At first, I ignored them, assuming work emails or reminders. Then I saw Maggie's name trending on social media. She had posted a long caption under a photo of herself crying, claiming her jealous sister cut her off financially out of spite. She didn't mention my name, but the details were too specific to mistake. "Some people act generous just to hold power over you," she wrote, "and when you stop worshiping them, they show their true face." The comments came fast. Friends, acquaintances, even strangers chiming in, calling her brave, calling her sister cruel. I read every word without flinching. For years, I had been her silent benefactor, the invisible hand that kept her life from falling apart. Now she had turned me into a villain to feed her own story. I closed the app, not out of anger, but final understanding. I deleted her number, her messages, her contact from every account. It wasn't rage that guided me, just the certainty that I was done playing her part. I walked to the trash and dropped the bouquet inside. The flowers were already wilting, their stems bending under their own weight. For the first time in years, I felt something close to freedom. It didn't roar or announce itself. It just settled quietly, like air filling a space that had long been empty. The next morning began like any other. I was brewing coffee when my laptop chimed with a new email. The sender's name stopped me mid-motion. Jenna Myers. It had been years since we last spoke. She was a colleague from the firm I used to work for, someone who had quietly stood by me during long nights and silent humiliations I never shared with family. I hesitated for a second before clicking open. The subject line read, "You should see this." Inside was a short message. "Found this while editing last week's event footage. You deserve to know." Below her note was a single video file, labeled backstage2raw.mov. My stomach tightened as I pressed play. The screen filled with shaky behind-the-scenes footage. Decorators adjusting tablecloths, waiters carrying trays, the soft buzz of conversation before guests arrived. Then I saw her, Maggie, standing near the bar with two friends, laughing, holding a champagne flute. Her voice came through clearly over the background noise. "It's her money anyway," she said, grinning. "She'll pay even if she doesn't come." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The laughter around her felt sharper than glass, each sound cutting deeper than the last. The video continued, showing her giving orders, posing for pictures, smiling for the camera, the perfect hostess of a party I had unknowingly funded for my own humiliation. I replayed the clip again and again, as if repetition might dull the sting, but it didn't. The more I watched, the less anger I felt. What replaced it wasn't calm nor forgiveness, but a vast emptiness, a quiet realization that this had never been about misunderstanding. It had always been about entitlement. She never thought she had to earn anything because she knew I would always pay the bill, literally and emotionally. When I finally stopped the video, my coffee had gone cold. The email notification blinked again. Jenna had sent a follow-up. "I remember how proud you were when you told me about the party," she wrote. "You didn't deserve that. You deserved better." For the first time in a long while, someone said something that didn't sound like pity or judgment, just truth. I sat there for several minutes, reading her message over and over. My reflection in the dark screen looked almost unfamiliar. Someone quieter, older, steadier. I clicked download, saving the file into a new folder. Then I printed a still image from the video, Maggie laughing, glass raised midair, the exact moment she mocked me. I slid the photo into a folder labeled "For Later." As the printer hummed, my mind started to clear. Every scene from the past few weeks replayed itself like a puzzle, finally aligning. My parents' smiles, her fake apology, the online post, the endless cycle of blame and silence. I had spent my entire life walking away to keep peace that never existed. Every retreat had been mistaken for weakness. Every silence had been treated like permission. Not this time. I arranged the printed papers neatly, stacked them beside the folder, and closed my laptop. The evidence wasn't just proof of what she said. It was proof of who she really was, and of who I no longer had to be. I didn't know exactly how the next confrontation would unfold, but I knew it was coming. My parents would see the truth, not because I wanted revenge, but because they needed to stop believing her story. I placed the folder into my bag, zipped it carefully, and stood by the window. The world outside moved on as if nothing had changed, yet something inside me had shifted completely. For the first time, I wasn't the one running from the noise. I was ready to face it. I turned off the lights, picked up my keys, and whispered the words I had waited years to mean. This time, I wasn't walking away. The house looked exactly as I remembered, too clean, too quiet, as if it had been frozen in time. I parked across the street and sat for a moment, watching the lights flicker in the living room window. Inside, I could see my parents sitting together on the couch. The television was on, though neither of them seemed to be watching it. My mother's posture was rigid, my father's expression fixed in that familiar mask of detachment. When I knocked, there was a long pause before the door opened. My mother, Renee, greeted me with a cautious smile. "Clara, we weren't expecting you." Her tone carried the same politeness she reserved for neighbors or distant relatives. I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. My father, Richard, looked up from the couch but didn't rise. The faint sound of a game show filled the silence between us. I didn't waste words. I set my bag down, pulled out the printed still from the video, and placed it on the coffee table. Then I opened my laptop and pressed play. The recording began. Laughter, clinking glasses, as the glitter of the party lights. And then Maggie's voice filled the room. "It's her money anyway. She'll pay even if she doesn't come." No one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the television in the background. Renee shifted in her seat, glancing at my father as if silently asking him to do something. Richard leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the frozen frame of Maggie's smiling face on the screen. "Family issues shouldn't go public," he finally said, his voice low but firm. I looked at him for a moment, trying to read whether it was disappointment or defense I heard in his tone. "It's already public," I said quietly. She made sure of that. Renee exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. "You've always made things dramatic, Clara. You could have come to us before letting everyone know. Now people are talking, and your sister's humiliated." I blinked in disbelief. She's humiliated? She staged a lie and used my name to build sympathy. My voice stayed steady, but every word felt heavier. "I'm not here to argue. I just thought you should see the truth." Richard sighed, the kind of sigh that ended every childhood argument I ever lost. "You girls have always been different," he said, not looking at me. "Maggie's impulsive, you're sensitive. That's just how it is." There it was, the same dismissal wrapped in the language of understanding. I had grown up in that tone. It had taught me to shrink my emotions into silence. This time I didn't. "If you want to keep calling it family, then keep it private," I said. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my house key, and placed it on the table. "But do it without me." Renee's eyes widened. "Clara, don't be ridiculous." I met her gaze. "I'm not. I'm finished." I closed the laptop, slid it back into my bag, and stood. The weight of years seemed to lift slightly as I took a step toward the door. Richard didn't stop me. Renee called after me once, her voice soft, but not enough to make me turn around. Outside, the air felt sharper. I walked to my car, the crunch of gravel underfoot oddly comforting. My phone buzzed in my pocket just as I reached for the door handle. Maggie's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring until the sound faded into silence. Then I switched the phone off. Through the car window, I could still see the glow from the living room. My parents sitting where I'd left them, unchanged, unmoved, and unwilling to see. For the first time, I didn't feel anger, just finality. I started the engine and looked straight ahead. Whatever came next, I would face it alone. And that realization didn't scare me. It felt like freedom. A few days later, I received a message from Noah Bennett, a journalist I hadn't spoken to in years. He used to work with me at the community paper before moving to Denver Weekly. His message was brief. "Saw what's been happening. You deserve to tell your side." I hesitated before replying, unsure if I was ready to share more. But Noah wasn't the type to chase gossip. He always cared about the truth, and that was something I could trust. We met at a small cafe near the university. The conversation started cautiously. He asked how I was doing, and I said I was fine, though we both knew it was a lie. I handed him the folder that had become my armor, the printed receipts, the video, still the statements. He studied each page with quiet focus. "You kept everything," he said softly. I nodded. It was all I had left to defend myself. Noah leaned back, thoughtful. "If we frame this as a story about financial manipulation inside families, not naming anyone directly, people will still understand, and you'll have control of the narrative." His words felt like a door opening after a long silence. I agreed. Over the next 2 days, we worked together on the article. I wrote my part as if I were writing to my younger self, the version of me that thought being generous meant being loved. Noah edited with care, trimming sentences but keeping the soul intact. When it was ready, we published it under the headline, "The Price of Family Loyalty." The story spread quickly. By evening, hundreds of comments flooded in, sharing similar experiences. Siblings who drained savings, parents who played favorites, partners who took advantage. People weren't angry. They were relieved. They saw themselves in my story. And yet, as I watched the article climb in views, I realized something was still unfinished. The truth wasn't just mine to hide behind an alias anymore. That night, I opened my phone and created a live stream. No filters, no lighting, just me sitting at my desk. My hands trembled at first, but when the counter showed 200 viewers, then 2,000, something inside me steadied. I'm not here to accuse anyone, I began. I just want to talk about what happens when love and obligation blur together. I spoke slowly, explaining the events. How generosity became expectation, how silence became guilt, and how people can turn kindness into currency. As I talked, the comments section filled with hearts and words of encouragement. You're brave, you're not alone. I went through this too. The numbers grew until I stopped looking. For the first time, I didn't feel like the invisible one. I felt heard. By the next morning, the live stream had gone viral. News blogs picked it up, podcasts quoted it. The phrase family financial gaslighting began trending on Twitter. Maggie's PR firm released a statement denying involvement, but the damage was done. Screenshots of her old posts, her sponsorships, her smiling brand endorsements, all flooded with comments. Within a week, her biggest client canceled their deal, followed by another. The company she worked with issued a quiet apology for misrepresentation. When I saw the headlines, I didn't feel victory, only clarity. The truth had moved on its own, faster than revenge ever could. That evening, I opened another short live session, not to continue the drama, but to close it. I'm not here for revenge, I said, my voice calm. I'm here for closure. The comment section flooded again, but I ended the stream after only a few minutes. As the screen faded to black, I looked at my reflection. The weight that had followed me for years, the guilt, the fear of being misunderstood, was gone. What remained wasn't triumph, but peace. I closed my laptop, took a deep breath, and finally felt what I had been chasing all along. The quiet power of letting go. Weeks passed quietly, yet the ripple kept spreading. One morning, I woke to a headline that made me sit up straight. Local couple under tax investigation, financial irregularities at R&R Consulting. The article named Richard and Renee Bennett, my parents. The report explained how years of underreported income and charitable deductions had triggered an audit. The journalist referenced a public discussion about family finances that had recently gone viral, though it didn't mention my name. The irony was almost poetic. The people who once told me to keep problems private now found their own exposed for everyone to read. In the following days, reporters camped outside their neighborhood. Richard's company's statement claimed it was a clerical oversight, but the damage had already been done. Renee stopped attending her charity brunches, and their friends avoided eye contact in public. When the city tax office confirmed the penalty, it amounted to more than they could afford. They were forced to put their house on the market. Seeing the listing online felt unreal. The same house where every family dinner had turned into quiet judgment, now framed in bright real estate photos staged for strangers. Meanwhile, Maggie's story took a darker turn. After her sponsors withdrew, journalists began investigating her PR firm. Old clients spoke up about unpaid work, manipulated campaigns, and falsified endorsements. Her name started trending again, this time beside words like fraud and fabrication. I saw one clip of her leaving a studio, head down, sunglasses hiding her face, reporters shouting questions she couldn't answer. I didn't feel satisfaction, only a kind of weary recognition. The truth has a way of catching up. My inbox filled with new messages, invitations to interviews, podcast requests, and offers from advocacy groups. I declined them all, except one. A media company in Seattle reached out, offering me a position as director of communications for their transparency initiative. The role aligned with everything I had once dreamed of doing before my world revolved around cleaning up other people's chaos. When I accepted the offer, the HR director wrote, "Your story shows what integrity looks like under pressure." That sentence stayed with me more than any apology ever could. In the final week before I moved, I drove through Boulder one last time. The snow had begun to melt, revealing grass beneath months of white. Streets that once carried the weight of memory now felt strangely neutral, like pages ready to be rewritten. I packed the last box and turned off the lights in my apartment. As I checked my phone for directions, a notification appeared. One new message from Maggie. It read, "I didn't think you'd actually leave." For a long moment, I stared at the screen. There was no anger left, no resentment, not even pity, only understanding. Maggie had built her world around control, controlling narratives, people, and outcomes. My leaving wasn't just distance. It was proof that she no longer had any power over me. I deleted the message without replying. At the airport the next morning, the sky over the Rockies glowed pale blue. My flight to Seattle was boarding. I looked out the window as the plane rose above the clouds, Boulder shrinking into a patchwork of snow and rooftops. My chest tightened, not from grief, but release. For the first time, I felt untethered. As sunlight filled the cabin, I whispered to myself. Leaving wasn't running away, it was freedom. The words felt light, like air. The past had lost its grip, and what lay ahead was not revenge, not redemption, but a beginning. Life in Seattle moved quietly, almost like the city had been waiting for me to arrive. My new apartment overlooked a stretch of water that shimmered silver every morning. I kept my days simple: work, walks, coffee with colleagues who knew nothing about my past. There were no dinner invitations I felt forced to attend, no family calls loaded with guilt. Peace, I learned, wasn't loud, it was steady. At work, I rebuilt what I had once lost: trust in myself. My team respected me, not for what I had endured, but for how I worked. I no longer needed validation from anyone who measured worth through convenience or appearance. Each day, as I closed my laptop, I felt a small, certain pride, the kind that grows quietly, like roots beneath the surface. Sometimes, late at night, messages appeared in my inbox from people I had never met. "Your live stream helped me talk to my mother. I finally stood up for myself after watching your story. Thank you for showing that walking away isn't weakness." I read every one of them, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying, always humbled. Their words reminded me that what had once been my shame had become someone else's permission to heal. One evening after work, I opened an old notebook. Between the empty pages, I began to write, not to document pain, but to record perspective. My pen moved easily, the words forming without hesitation. Family isn't defined by blood, but by respect. I underlined it twice. That sentence felt truer than anything I had ever said aloud. Blood can bind, but respect is what sustains. Without it, even love decays. Weeks later, when my new colleague suggested creating a short talk for the company's social channel, I agreed. Not a retelling, but a reflection. The studio was small, only a single light and a camera. I looked straight ahead and spoke calmly. "Thank you for staying until the end. If you've ever had to walk away to protect your peace, know this: you made the right choice." My voice didn't shake. For the first time, it sounded like someone who had stopped fighting ghosts. The clip went online that same night. Within hours, messages and comments appeared beneath it. Stories of boundaries, forgiveness, self-worth. I responded to one, then another, until I lost count. Finally, I wrote, "Share your thoughts below. I'll be reading them all." And I meant it. This wasn't about attention anymore. It was about connection, the kind that doesn't ask for anything in return. The next morning, I woke early. The city was still half asleep, the streets wet with last night's rain. I brewed coffee, tied back my hair, and stood by the door of my apartment. For a moment, I listened to the hum of traffic far below, to the quiet pulse of a place that now felt like home. Then I turned the handle and opened the door. Light poured in, golden and soft. It brushed across the floor, the walls, and the edges of everything new. I stepped forward, letting it fill the space around me. There was no need for closure anymore. The story had already found its ending. Not in revenge, not in loss, but in understanding. As the sun rose higher, I whispered one final thought to myself. A truth I had learned the hard way, but would never forget. Peace isn't something you find in others. It's something you choose, every single day. And with that, I smiled. The door stood open, and for the first time in years, so did